The sky was on fire. Flames danced across the shattered remains of the spacecraft, metal groaning as it twisted under the weight of destruction. Ethan Drake had survived countless missions, but this time, he wasn't sure if survival was an option. Ethan's hands trembled as he unbuckled his harness, smoke filling his lungs with every breath. Around him, the wreckage of the Orion 4 burned against the backdrop of a sky painted in hues of violet and deep blue. The planet, identified as Zaylos, had not been their intended destination. Yet, here they were stranded, lost, and surrounded by the unknown. His earpiece crackled. "Ethan? Do you copy?" The voice belonged to Dr. Helena Grant, the mission's lead scientist. "I'm here," Ethan rasped, coughing. "What's the status?" "Bad. The ship's comms are fried. No way to reach HQ. And..." Her voice faltered. "We're not alone." Ethan's heart pounded. He reached for his pulse rifle, scanning the terrain. Massive, jagged rock formations loomed in the distance, their dark silhouettes contrasting against the eerie glow of 3 alien moons. The vegetation pulsed faintly, as if alive. And then, he saw them shadows moving between the flames. They were being watched. A guttural roar shattered the silence. Ethan barely had time to react before something massive barreled into him, sending him sprawling across the ground. His head slammed against the dirt, and for a split second, stars exploded in his vision. When his eyesight cleared, he saw them. A group of warriors tall, their muscular frames covered in obsidian armor etched with glowing tribal markings. Their amber eyes gleamed like molten gold, and each carried weapons unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Blades that hummed with energy, spears that crackled with blue lightning. The Carthun. The leader stepped forward, a female warrior, her stance rigid with authority. Her dark, braided hair was adorned with silver rings, and a long scar ran from her temple to her jaw. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes sharp and unwavering locked onto Ethan with a challenge. Ethan pushed himself up, gripping his rifle tighter. "We don't want trouble. We crashed here by accident. Our ship." The warrior cut him off with a single word, spoken in a tongue both alien and strangely melodic. Then, she raised her spear. A battle stance. The moment was clear. Ethan knew an invitation to combat when he saw one. This was no mere ambush. This was a ritual. The Carthun warriors watched in silence, their hands resting on their weapons, but none moved. It was not a slaughter they sought, it was honor. Ethan's gut twisted. He could refuse, but something told him that would be worse than accepting. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, but one thing he understood? In war, respect mattered. Taking a deep breath, he lowered his rifle. "Fine. You want to fight? Let's do this." A flicker of amusement passed through the warrior's golden eyes. Then, she lunged. Their battle was swift and brutal. The warrior moved like lightning, her spear striking with precise, calculated force. Ethan dodged, rolled, countered using his training, his instincts. But she was faster. Stronger. A strike to his ribs sent him staggering. Pain flared. He barely managed to duck as the next blow came aimed straight for his heart. Then, it happened. The spear, her ceremonial weapon, was hurled at him with deadly accuracy. Without thinking, without even realizing what he was doing, Ethan's hands shot up. And he caught it. A collective gasp rippled through the Carthun warriors. The warrior Seraka froze. Her expression, once fierce and determined, shifted into something unreadable. Shock. Perhaps even disbelief. "Ethan, still catching his breath, stared at the weapon in his grip. The weight of it felt unnatural, yet familiar, like it belonged to him. Seraka stepped back. Then, slowly, she dropped to one knee. The other warriors followed. Ethan's mind raced. What the hell is going on? Dr. Grant's voice crackled in his earpiece. Ethan, I think you just activated an ancient Carthon law. He swallowed hard. And what does that mean? A pause. Then, her words sent a chill down his spine. It means Seraka is yours. Forever. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of the spear in his hands heavier than he could have imagined. The silence that followed was suffocating. He had survived countless missions, faced death more times than he could count, but nothing had prepared him for this. Around him, the Carthon warriors remained kneeling, their gazes locked onto him with a mixture of reverence and resentment. And Seraka, her golden eyes burned with something between fury and reluctant acceptance. The moment shattered when a deep voice rumbled through the clearing. One of the older warriors, his face marked with the lines of age and battle, stepped forward. He spoke in the Carthon tongue, his voice steady and authoritative. Ethan's translator earpiece struggled for a second before finally catching up. The rite has been completed. The law is absolute. Ethan took a cautious step forward, lowering the spear slightly. Look, I don't know what kind of law you're talking about, but this is a misunderstanding. I caught the spear by accident. The warrior's golden eyes flickered with amusement, but there was no humor in his expression. There are no accidents in the ways of the Carthon. Seraka rose to her feet in one swift movement, her jaw clenched so tight Ethan thought she might crack her teeth. This is absurd, she hissed in her native tongue. He is an outsider. He does not understand our ways. The elder warrior regarded her calmly. Yet the spear chose him. The murmur of the gathered warriors grew louder. Ethan could feel the hostility from some, curiosity from others. But one thing was clear: this was not something he could talk his way out of easily. Dr. Grant's voice crackled in his earpiece again. Ethan, I've been running scans on the Carthon cultural database. This ritual, the one you just took part in, it's binding. The moment you caught that spear, you invoked an ancient warrior bond. Seraka is now bound to you as your combat partner. For life. Ethan felt his stomach drop. You've got to be kidding me? Seraka's fists tightened at her sides. This is a disgrace. I am a warrior of the Carthon. I will not be tethered to an outsider. A new voice cut through the tense air. She shouldn't have to. The crowd parted as another warrior stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, his armor adorned with extra plating and intricate engravings that set him apart. His piercing gaze was fixed on Ethan, but the disdain in his expression was reserved for Seraka. Ravok, Seraka muttered, her tone laced with disdain. Ethan didn't need an introduction to understand who this was. Ravok was a leader, perhaps even the head of a faction. And from the way his eyes burned, he was not pleased with the outcome of this ritual. You expect us to accept this? Ravok's voice was sharp, his words directed at the elder. A foreigner? A human? Taking one of our best warriors as his own? This weakens us. Ethan exhaled slowly, already exhausted from the crash, the fight, and now the politics. For the last time, I don't want to take anyone. Just let me and my team go, and we'll be out of your way. Seraka shot him a glare. It is not that simple. The elder nodded in agreement. The law does not bend for our convenience. The bond is sealed. He turned to Ethan. If you are to remain among us, you must learn our ways. Ravok coughed. If he is to remain among us, he must prove he is worthy. Ethan had a bad feeling about where this was going. Let me guess you want me to fight. Varak's lips curled into a smirk. Not just fight. If you wish to claim Seraka as your battle partner, you must endure the trials of the Carthon. Ethan sighed. Of course. Seraka crossed her arms. Do not think for a second that I will make this easy for you. Ethan met her gaze, a slow smirk forming. Didn't expect you to. The gathered warriors erupted into a mix of approval and murmurs. The trials were set. Ethan had no choice but to adapt, or he wouldn't survive long enough to see another sunrise on this planet. The darkness of Zaylos had always held secrets, but none as terrifying as the one that now stirred beneath the surface. For centuries, the Carthon had spoken in hushed tones about the Ravok creature of nightmares, sealed away in the deepest chasms of the planet. A relic of an ancient war, its hunger for destruction was insatiable. And now, something had awakened it. Ethan was still struggling to grasp the intricacies of Carthon tradition when the first reports of destruction reached the tribe. Villages reduced to smoldering ruins. Entire hunting parties vanished without a trace. Survivors, those who were lucky enough, spoke of shadows with glowing red eyes, of massive claws that ripped through steel and flesh alike. The summons came swiftly. The elders of the Carthon gathered in a great hall, their expressions grim as they debated the best course of action. Seraka sat beside Ethan, her body tense. She had barely spoken since their fateful duel, the weight of their newfound bond pressing down on her like a mountain. The Ravok is more than a mere beast, one of the elder warriors said. It is the embodiment of chaos itself. If we do not act, it will devour us all. Varak, ever the opportunist, rose to his feet. And yet, we have been weakened from within. This outsider, he gestured toward Ethan, his voice dripping with disdain, has brought nothing but discord to our people. Perhaps it is no coincidence that the Ravok awakens now. Ethan clenched his fists but held his tongue. He had seen enough political maneuvering in his time to know when someone was grasping for power. Seraka, however, was less patient. You dishonor yourself, Varak, she snapped. The laws of our ancestors are clear. The bond has been formed. Then perhaps the ancestors were wrong. Varak's amber eyes burned with challenge. Perhaps we need to forge a new path without outsiders meddling in our fate. A murmur spread through the hall. The Carthon were bound by tradition, but fear had a way of twisting even the most steadfast hearts. The threat of the Ravok was real, but so was Varak's ambition. And if Ethan wasn't careful, he wouldn't just have a monstrous nightmare to contend with, he would have a civil war on his hands. As the arguments raged on, Seraka turned to Ethan. For the first time since their duel, he saw hesitation in her eyes. Torn between duty, tradition, and something far more dangerous, something personal. We need a plan, Ethan murmured. Not just against the Ravok, but against the chaos it's bringing with it. Seraka nodded, her jaw set with determination. Then we must move before Varak does. And before the Ravok turns this planet into a graveyard. The night stretched on as they prepared for the battle ahead. Against the monster in the shadows. Against the war brewing among them. Against the unknown that awaited in the darkness of Zaylos. The decision had been made. If Ethan Drake wanted to prove his worth, to be accepted as Seraka's destined companion, he would have to survive the trial of the hallowed path. It was an ancient test, one that no outsider had ever attempted because none had ever been given the chance. The trial was simple in principle but deadly in execution. Ethan had to traverse the hallowed path, a treacherous canyon teeming with the most vicious creatures of Zaylos. The Carthon warriors revered this place as a crucible that had forged their greatest champions. Only those who emerged from the darkness could claim true strength. As Ethan stood at the canyon's entrance, the warriors of Carthon gathered around, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and grim anticipation. Ravok, of course, looked particularly pleased. He had lobbied for this test, fully expecting Ethan to fail. A slow, humiliating death would serve his ambitions well. Seraka approached Ethan, her usual confidence replaced with something more subdued. "Stay close to me," she murmured. "You don't know what lies ahead." Ethan gave her a half-smile. "I've survived worse." She scoffed but said nothing more. The moment they stepped into the canyon, the whispers of the wind were replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the distant growls of unseen predators. The further they descended, the more the weight of the darkness pressed down on them. The first challenge came swiftly. A pack of scarred beasts, four-legged monstrosities covered in obsidian-like armor, emerged from the shadows, their glowing blue eyes locking onto the intruders. Ethan barely had time to draw his weapon before the creatures lunged. Seraka moved with lethal grace, her blade slicing through the air in precise arcs. Ethan, relying on his instincts, rolled to the side, dodging a razor-sharp claw aimed at his throat. He fired his pulse gun, but the energy blasts ricocheted off the Skarn's armor. Cursing, he switched tactics. Using the terrain to his advantage, he baited one of the creatures toward a jagged rock formation. At the last second, he leaped aside, sending the beast crashing headfirst into the spikes. Seraka glanced at him with something that might have been approval. Not bad. They pressed on, deeper into the canyon. Each turn brought new dangers: flesh-eating vines that reacted to their movements, swarms of venomous insectoids, and unstable rock formations that threatened to collapse at any moment. Ethan quickly learned that brute force wasn't enough. Strategy and adaptability were his greatest weapons. Hours passed, exhaustion creeping into his limbs. But the final challenge awaited them. As they reached the heart of the canyon, a guttural roar echoed through the cavernous expanse. Emerging from the shadows was a nightmarish creature, a Ravok, a towering beast with chitinous plating and 3 glowing maws filled with rows of serrated teeth. This was the true test. Ethan knew that Seraka could handle herself, but the Ravok was unlike anything he had ever faced. As the beast charged, he barely managed to dodge its massive claws. His mind raced. Guns were useless against its armor. Melee combat was suicide. Then he saw it. The beast's underbelly, soft, unprotected. "Seraka! We need to make it expose its stomach," he called. She nodded, immediately understanding. As Ethan distracted the Ravok, Seraka weaved around it, striking at its limbs to force it into a defensive stance. Then, timing it perfectly, Ethan grabbed a loose stalactite from above and drove it downward as the beast reared up. The makeshift spear pierced its soft flesh, and with a final, ear-splitting shriek, the Ravok collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan turned to find Seraka staring at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Not just in respect but in recognition. They emerged from the canyon battered and bruised but victorious. The Carthon warriors stood in stunned silence before, one by one, they pounded their chests in salute. Even Ravok, though clearly displeased, could not deny what had just transpired. Ethan Drake had survived the trial of the hallowed path. And in doing so, he had taken his first true step toward becoming one of them. The firelight flickered against the cavern walls, casting elongated shadows of the gathered Carthon elders. Their faces were lined with age, their expressions grave. The devastation from Ravok's attack had left them reeling, and now they searched for answers in the wisdom of the past. Ethan stood beside Seraka, his body still aching from the trial he had endured in the HM Nui Bong Ti. But pain was secondary to the urgency of the moment. The Carthon warriors whispered among themselves, their distrust of him still evident, yet now tempered by the realization that he had survived where many would have perished. One of the eldest, a hunched figure draped in ceremonial robes, stepped forward. His eyes, clouded with the weight of centuries, settled upon Ethan. "The stars have long whispered of this day," he murmured, his voice brittle yet unwavering. "The ancient texts speak of a warrior from beyond our skies, one who will stand against the darkness and strike it down." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some in awe, others in doubt. Ethan stiffened. "You're saying this is some kind of prophecy? About me?" He had never put much stock in fate or destiny, and the idea of being part of some grand cosmic plan felt surreal. The elder nodded solemnly. "You arrived when the shadows stirred. Your presence is no coincidence. And if the prophecy holds true, then there is only one weapon capable of slaying Ravok, the Spear of Light." Seraka inhaled sharply. "That is a myth. No warrior has seen it in centuries." "A myth," the elder agreed, "but one rooted in truth. The spear lies beyond the wastes of Azrael, where only the worthy may tread. If the warrior from the stars seeks to prove his place among us, he must find it." Ethan exchanged a glance with Seraka. There was no choice. If this was the only way to stop Ravok, they had to take the risk. Before dawn, they departed, their journey taking them across the scorched lands where the air shimmered with heat and the bones of fallen creatures jutted from the sand. Ethan, though exhausted, remained focused. Seraka was silent beside him, her thoughts unreadable. As the hours stretched, Ethan finally spoke. "You don't believe in the prophecy, do you?" Seraka's fingers tightened around the hilt of her blade. "I believe in actions, not fate. The Carthon do not place trust in unseen forces. We trust in steel, in strength, in what we can grasp with our own hands." Ethan smirked. "And yet, here we are, chasing a legendary weapon." She shot him a sideways glance. "Because Ravok is real. And if this prophecy holds any truth, then I would rather see it tested than ignore it and let my people fall." A comfortable silence settled between them. It was a rare moment of understanding, one not dictated by tradition, duty, or conflict. Just two warriors, bound by necessity, forging a path into the unknown. By nightfall, they reached the first marker of the ancient path, a ruined temple, its stone pillars cracked and worn by time. The air felt heavier here, charged with something unseen. Ethan stepped forward, scanning the carvings on the walls. "Looks like directions. And a warning." Seraka traced the symbols, her expression hardening. "Only those who walk in balance may claim the spear. Strength alone is not enough." Ethan exhaled. "Great. So we need more than just brute force. What does that even mean?" Before she could answer, the ground trembled. The air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. From the darkness, something stirred. The trial for the Spear of Light had begun. The battlefield stretched before them, a desolate expanse of shattered rock and scorched earth. The armies of the Carthon and their new-found allies stood at the ready, their war cries echoing across the plains. Above them, the sky churned with dark clouds, a storm gathering in the wake of the final confrontation. At the heart of the chaos stood Ethan, the Spear of Light gripped tightly in his hands, its luminous blade pulsing with energy. Seraka stood beside him, her gaze locked on the enemy lines. Across the battlefield, the monstrous form of Ravok loomed, its hulking silhouette wreathed in shadow and malice. At its feet, grotesque creatures twisted, remnants of once proud warriors now corrupted by the beast's influence, snarled and clawed at the ground. The final battle had begun. Ethan inhaled sharply, bracing himself. He had come a long way from being a stranded outsider. Now, he was the key to the survival of an entire people. As the war horns blared, he raised the spear high, signaling the charge. The Carthons surged forward, their weapons glinting in the dim light. Arrows flew, steel clashed against steel, and the ground trembled beneath the force of combat. In the midst of the fray, Seraka's blade met Varak's. The rogue warrior had waited for this moment, his thirst for vengeance boiling over. He saw Ethan as a pretender, an interloper who had stolen what was rightfully his. Their blades clashed in a furious dance of skill and fury, sparks flying with each strike. "You were never worthy," Varak snarled, his eyes wild with rage. "She was meant to be mine." Seraka's expression remained cold, unwavering. "You were never meant to lead. And I was never meant to be owned." She twisted her blade, knocking Varak off balance before driving her knee into his chest. He stumbled, but rage made him reckless. He lunged again, their battle a brutal reflection of the war raging around them. Meanwhile, Ethan carved a path through the monstrous horde, the spear of light searing through the darkness. Ravok roared, its eyes locking onto him. The beast lunged, claws slicing through the air. Ethan barely dodged in time, rolling across the dirt before leaping to his feet. He had only one chance. One strike had to count. Pain flared through his side as one of Ravok's claws grazed him, sending him tumbling back. Blood seeped through his armor, but he forced himself to stand, gritting his teeth. He raised the spear and charged. The weapon's power surged through him, guiding his movements. He ducked beneath another swipe, then drove the glowing blade deep into Ravok's chest. The beast shrieked, its body convulsing as energy coursed through it. Ethan twisted the spear, sending a final surge of light through the monster. With an earth-shaking roar, Ravok collapsed, its massive form crumbling into dust. The battlefield fell silent as the creatures under its thrall recoiled, their will broken. One by one, they fell, their corruption dissipating into the wind. Varak, seeing the fall of his supposed champion, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all Seraka needed. She struck with precision, her blade piercing his chest. He gasped, eyes wide with disbelief before he crumpled to the ground. The war was over. The Carthon stood victorious. But as Ethan fell to his knees, exhausted and wounded, he knew that victory had come at a cost. Seraka rushed to his side, catching him before he collapsed completely. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with something more than admiration, something deeper. Ethan chuckled weakly. "Yeah, but let's never do that again." As the first rays of dawn broke through the dissipating storm, the Carthon warriors lifted their voices in triumph. The battle had been won, but a new journey was only beginning. The battlefield lay silent in the aftermath of the war. The once fearsome roar of Ravok had faded into nothingness, leaving only the scattered remnants of destruction and loss. Ethan struggled to steady his breath, each movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his body. The spear of light, now dull and lifeless, remained embedded in the ashen remains of the fallen beast. Seraka knelt beside him, her strong arms steadying him before he collapsed entirely. Around them, the Carthon warriors gathered, their expressions a mix of triumph and mourning. Though they had won, the cost of victory was evident in the faces of the fallen and the broken villages that dotted the landscape. Ethan's vision blurred as exhaustion and blood loss threatened to overtake him. He barely registered Seraka's voice calling his name, nor the hands that lifted him onto a makeshift stretcher. The world around him faded into a haze of movement and muffled voices as he was carried back to the heart of the Carthon stronghold. Days passed in a fog of pain and recovery. When Ethan finally awoke, he found himself in a chieftain's tent, his wounds bound with bandages woven from alien fibers. The air smelled of herbs and incense, a stark contrast to the stench of battle that still haunted his dreams. Seraka sat by his side, her usual stoic expression softened by something he could not quite place. "You live," she stated simply, though the relief in her voice betrayed her emotions. Ethan managed a weak smile. "Yeah. Wouldn't want to miss the celebration." Seraka huffed, shaking her head. "You should rest, but there is much to discuss." She helped him sit up, adjusting the thick furs covering him. Outside, the Carthon warriors were gathering, their voices rising in chants of remembrance. At the center of the stronghold, the surviving elders stood in solemn discussion. Among them was Varek's second-in-command, now forced to acknowledge Seraka's right to leadership. A hush fell over the assembly as Seraka stepped forward, her posture one of quiet authority. "We have suffered. We have lost," she began, her voice carrying across the gathering. "But we have also proven our strength. Ravok is no more. The threat that has haunted our ancestors is finally vanquished." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but the air was still heavy with uncertainty. One of the elders spoke, his aged eyes sharp with wisdom. "And what of the outsider?" His gaze turned to Ethan, who, with Seraka's help, had risen to his feet. The prophecy spoke of a warrior who would defeat the great beast. Now that it has come to pass, what role does he have among us? Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. He had fought for them, bled for them, but he was still an outsider in their world. Would they accept him, or had his purpose already been fulfilled? Seraka's expression darkened slightly at the elder's words, but she remained composed. "Ethan is no longer just an outsider," she declared firmly. "He has earned his place among us, among our warriors. Without him, we would have fallen." The tension in the crowd wavered. Some warriors nodded in agreement, others still held their reservations. The Carthon had always been wary of outsiders, yet Ethan had done what no Carthon before him had managed. The same elder considered her words before finally nodding. Then he must decide. Will he remain among us, or does he seek to return to his own world? Ethan stiffened. The question had been lingering in his mind since the battle ended. His ship was still wrecked beyond repair, but if he could find a way, did he even want to leave? Earth was his home, yet this world had become something more than just a battlefield to him. His gaze met Seraka's, and for the first time, he saw the unspoken question in her eyes as well. Would he stay? Could he? Ethan took a deep breath and turned back to the crowd. "I came to this world by accident," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I never expected to find a place here. But I have fought beside you, suffered beside you, and now, I cannot imagine leaving it all behind." Seraka's expression softened, a rare flicker of emotion crossing her face. Ethan stepped forward, addressing the warriors before him. "If you will have me, I will stay. Not as an outsider, but as one of you." A murmur ran through the gathered Carthon, and then, one by one, warriors began to strike their weapons against their armor, a rhythmic sound of acceptance. The elders exchanged glances before nodding in approval. Seraka turned to Ethan, her gaze steady. "Then it is decided. You will stand as one of us." Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he was searching for. He glanced up at the sky, the stars twinkling above, and knew that his journey had truly led him home.